Welcome to the FemiNinja Project. I am your host, Cheryl Ilov, middle-aged ninja hiding in plain sight, dedicated to restoring human dignity one person at a time and helping you unleash your personal power. Discover that it's possible to look like a woman, act like a lady, move like a ninja, and think like a warrior. And remember, men are always welcome on the FemiNinja Project. What happens when you change your mind? The ability for us to change our mind as often as we like is our prerogative and our God-given right. But what happens when we change our mind? Or, more specifically, when we change our mindset, when we change our thoughts and our thought patterns, the way we think, the results can be absolutely miraculous. And this miracle of nature is in each and every single one of us. And this miracle of nature, it is the scientific principle of neuroplasticity, which simply means that during the entire course of our lifetime, we are capable of changing the way we move, sense, feel, and think, that our brain and our nervous system is inherently flexible, malleable, plastique, that we are capable of learning new things, new patterns during the entire course of our lifetime. And that sounds like a no-brainer, if you'll please pardon the pun, but when I was in physical therapy school, which really wasn't that long ago, I graduated in 1996 from CU Health Sciences Center, we were taught in all of our neurology classes that this miracle of nature is something that disappeared at the age of 14, that we are so hardwired that we can't possibly learn new things, new patterns, and that's just really stupid, because how in the world did we ever learn how to drive a car, learn new things in college, learn how to take care of our children, learn how to get through life? So it's so funny that that's exactly what, according to conventional wisdom, even as recent as 22 years ago. However, we have come a long way, baby, and in the past 20 years in the field of neuroscience, they have discovered an awful lot about the brain and the way it functions and how we can actually improve our brain function during the entire course of our lifetime. So in this episode, I want to describe to you what it is, how it works, what exactly does this mean to you, and how you can tap into it to make the changes that you want to in your life. And as I said, traditional wisdom was that the brain functioned like a machine and that it was very hardwired. And just like a machine or a piece of equipment, when parts wore out, they were gone and there was absolutely nothing that could be done about it. And the belief both in the scientific and medical community was that the anatomy of the brain was fixed, and specific areas that had become damaged either with injury or stroke or some other type of malfunction, once it was gone, there was nothing that could be done about it. And even in physical therapy in the rehab community, when we were presented with somebody who had neurological dysfunction or some sort of brain injury, or perhaps as a result of surgery or a stroke or whatever, that what our job was just to help the person deal with the disability and to teach them compensatory mechanisms that they were never going to be able to recover from whatever happened to them. So our job was just to help them cope with whatever they had left, and certainly not to approach it in a way that they could recover some of the damaged tissue or the damaged areas, because that would have been giving them false hope. And I would like to take a moment just to emphasize that I said that the belief system of the medical and scientific community was that this neuroplasticity did not exist past the age of 14, because what's important here is those two words, belief system, because we all have our specific belief systems, and it also ties in with our self-image. And this is something that I'm going to get into a little bit later in the podcast, but I did want to introduce it early on since, as I said, the belief system of the scientific and the medical community was something that they really clung to, which is something that we all do. We all have our specific belief systems, and they do affect our self-image. And that kind of ties in together with the idea of how this neuroplasticity kind of challenges our belief systems and challenges our self-image in both a good, positive way. If not treated with respect and awareness, it can actually have a negative effect and a negative impact on us as well. So that's why I'm bringing it up. I think it's a wonderful subject to explore and one that is absolutely fascinating. And I have to admit it, yes, I am a geek about science, some science, the biological ones. The physical sciences, not so much. But I find our bodies amazing, and they are so malleable, and they are so able to change and function at an incredibly high level, not only just physically, but mentally, emotionally, at a very advanced age, so that we can be at the best that we can be for our entire lifetime, no matter what our age or even our current level of function. We can always improve because we are a dynamic system. And when I talk about this learning, this type of learning that we get from neuroplasticity, I don't mean the kind of learning that we get from a book or that type of education that we get from school. It's more of a visceral type of learning. It's the kind that takes place deep in our nervous system, and it's more of a visceral, organic sort of learning that changes our neural pathways. It actually changes our neural pathways, strengthens our neural connections, and actually grows more nerve tissue in our brain, more synaptic connections. Our brains actually get bigger. They function better, and our nervous system stays healthiest when it is constantly active and constantly challenged. Our brains continue to make those new connections based on our experiences. So that truly is an example of either use it or lose it. So that certainly applies. Which brings me to another subject of lifelong learning. And one of my favorite quotes from Henry Ford, of all people, is that anyone who stops learning is old, whether at the age of 20 or 80. Anyone who keeps learning stays young. And just in case you need proof of that, go to the Mandy Show on the Ladies Chit Chat Club and listen to her podcast titled 88 and Thriving, on her interview with a lovely young lady by the name of Hazel Ramsbotham, making 88 look like 40. This woman is truly an example of lifelong learning and keeping herself healthy, active, and vibrant by always staying engaged and interested in what's going on in life around her. So once you have listened to this podcast, go ahead and check that one out as well. I think you will be fascinated. There are so many ways to pursue this lifelong learning, of course, and this way to tap into nature's miracle that we have, this neuroplasticity, by introducing new experiences in our lives. And that can be as simple as just taking a different route home from work, or even going to a different grocery store. Going to the grocery store is my least favorite chore. I hate the grocery store. It's just so boring, and I just can't get in and out of there fast enough. However, once I realized if I changed my pattern, I usually start at the produce section and work my way through the store. If I started from the other end of the store and worked backwards in a different direction, it was a completely different experience. And I saw so many more wonderful things to buy, making more healthy choices. It was just less of a drag and a chore and more of, almost a culinary experience. Well, no, not quite. I wouldn't go quite that far, but it was almost even pleasurable, almost educational. And then I started to really get brave and started to go to different grocery stores. And again, it just started to wake up my brain. It started to light up my nervous system. It made everything more interesting, and it made me a lot more aware of my surroundings too, which is another thing that's very important to me and something I've been trying to emphasize in my podcasts as far as personal safety for ourselves, our children, our family, is to be very aware of our environment and always to have that environmental awareness in every single situation that we're in. So we have to go to the grocery store anyway, so we might as well practice that nice little skill, that little trick of environmental awareness while we're doing it as well. And it makes your grocery shopping a whole lot more interesting and much less of a drag. And on the upside, you're going to find a lot more things to choose from as far as dietary choices, and it's going to be a lot more interesting for you. So to take it a few steps further, then how do you use this neuroplasticity to sharpen your mind and your brain in a physical sense? So changing your activities or including in your physical activities something like dance, Pilates, yoga, Tai Chi, or something that really engages your mind as you're doing the physical activity. So you're really stimulating that mind-body connection. And as you're moving, it teaches you how to pay attention to your internal environment. So you've got that internal sense of awareness that you're working on too at the same time while you're getting your physical activity. You might end up being surprised at how tired you are when you do incorporate your mind and body as you're doing a physical activity. And it just reminds me of a story years ago when I first started incorporating Pilates into my private practice, and I was working in a clinic. And I worked with one woman who was probably in her mid-40s at the time that I was working with her, and she saw the other practitioner for body work, and then she came to me for 30 minutes of rehabilitative style of Pilates, and it was just a 30-minute session because that was all that her insurance would pay for. Well, in the meantime, she was in pretty good shape. She was very fit, and she worked out a lot. She was a power everythinger. She was a power walker. She did power yoga. She played power tennis. She was a power skier. She was a power dynamo, and everything she did was power, 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 power. And Pilates, traditional classical Pilates, really isn't done in a power way. Of course, now they do have power Pilates, there's power yoga, there's power everything, but especially because we were doing this in a rehabilitative type of setting, we were going very slowly, really engaging her deep core muscles and really working in a very visceral, organic way and really slowing her down and using fairly light resistance at the same time, which is something that she kept saying, well, I can do a lot more than this. I can do a lot more than this. This isn't enough weight, and I could do a lot more repetitions. And of course, I would explain to her, yes, I know you can, but that's not the purpose of what we're doing. And when she would leave my office, she would say, well, I don't really feel like I've done anything. I assured her that indeed she did, and that she might feel it a little bit later. And it wasn't until she had been seeing me for 3 weeks. It was about 3 weeks. And one day she came in and she said, I am so strong. I can do so much. I do so much activity. And when I go home after working with you on the reformer for 30 minutes, I have to sleep for at least an hour. I am exhausted. And I laughed and, just like a choir of angels began to sing because, okay, I made my point. And she told me that she thought maybe after the first session that it was just coincidental. But when it happened 3 times in a row, she realized, aha, there really is something going on here. And it's true. When you do engage yourself, your mind in such a deep way that you're fully embodying what you're doing and you're calling on all of your systems, all of your reflexes, all of the systems of the body to cooperate together. And it really is a little bit exhausting, but you do get used to it and you do something that we call habituate, which means once you do something often enough, your nervous system starts to integrate it and it doesn't feel like you're moving mountains. And then you can start to up the ante a little bit more. So it's just that process of establishing more neural connections in your brain, more synaptic connections, and just that integration really does take some time. So you have to be aware of it and to be gentle with yourself and not think, I should be pushing harder. Because the truth is, when you're moving slowly, you are actually not only firing up a lot more neurons and nerve tissue, you're also firing up a lot more muscle fibers and muscle tissue as well. So I will get into that a little bit later and expand on the idea of moving slowly and how that can help us. And one more way that you can begin to fire up this neuroplasticity for you is to try engaging in new and different creative activities, such as knitting, needlepoint, or crochet. If that's not your thing, study music, a foreign language, art or poetry, even sculpting. Sculpting is one of those things that's really good. And it's if you have any anger issues, like I have been told I do, that sculpting is really good for that. Instead of sculpting, I was a knitter, or I do knit. I haven't done it in a really long time because it's really good for anxiety, and it seemed to work for me. And instead of using something like sculpting to work out through my anger issues, I just went to the dojo and smacked some men around, and voila, I felt so much better. So it was wonderful. Win-win. So however you choose to do it, just varying your life's experiences from the very simple to the more complex will help keep your brain healthy and functioning at a very high level for life. Now I want to go back to the idea of our belief system and how it affects our self-image, both in a positive and negative way, and how that relates to neuroplasticity. And that is, what we believe is what we become. What we hear from other people, from the media, from medical experts, from society, and even what we tell ourselves is what we eventually believe. If we hear something often enough, even if it goes against our inherent belief system, our brain is logging that information. It's taking note of it, it's storing it in the vault, and once it hears it often enough, our brain does not determine whether something is true or false, right or wrong. It just continues to take that information in, somewhat like a computer in that respect, and eventually, if we hear something enough, we eventually do believe it. And what we believe is what we become. So that's why we have to be really careful about who we listen to and how we even talk to ourselves and the messages that we send ourselves. If we send ourselves negative messages, if we're always denigrating ourselves, even if it's in jest, oh, I'm so fat, I'm ugly, I'm this, I'm that, we eventually will believe it, and then we eventually will become it, because you can't fight against something like that where you're always getting that negative information, that negative message about how terrible you are or how bad you are. So that's why it is so important to talk softly, gently, and nicely to yourself. When we were kids, we were always taught how to be nice to other people and say nice things to other people, but nobody ever taught us how to be nice to ourselves. Especially as girls and now as women, we're always taught to put ourselves behind everybody else, get to the back of the line, make sure everybody else is taken care of, and we always nurture and respect somebody else and the people around us, but we don't always treat ourselves with that same amount of dignity and respect. And when we do that, again, we're just chipping away at not only our personal power, but our self-respect and our belief system, our self-image, who we are, and what we can really accomplish in life. By denigrating ourselves or letting somebody else do that to us, we are holding ourselves back. So start paying attention to how you talk to yourself. What do you say to yourself? And if it's not always positive or at least neutral, you might want to change that by tapping into this nature's miracle of neuroplasticity. So when I'm talking about self-image, it's different from self-esteem. Self-esteem is more of a personal sense of value and worth, where our self-image is more how we see ourselves from both an outward physical perspective as well as an internal one as well. So the two are different, but one does affect the other, and our belief system is really a huge part of developing our, what we call in the Feldenkrais method, our image of self. We talk a little funny in Feldenkrais, and I can get into that at another time. But again, that self-image and the belief system has a very powerful impact on us. And I'll just give you an example. When I was growing up, I was terrible at math, and I had been told, even as we were growing up, I came from a family of 5 girls, and I'm the third child. My mom actually had 3 of us in 4 years, so there was a lot of girl energy in that house. My poor father. Anyway, we were always told that girls just couldn't do math and they weren't very good at it, and by golly, I certainly lived up to that expectation, or shall I say lived down to it. And I was terrible in math all of my school years until finally very kindly algebra algebra instructor I had in high school was able to kind of break through and explain things to me in a way that really made sense. But still, I hated math. I did manage to get through not only my high school algebra, but what little algebra I was expected to take when I was in college. And then when I was looking into getting my graduate degree, and I was looking into several different professions, but physical therapy was the one that I really wanted. And then as I was looking into it, I realized that I had to take some advanced physics classes, which meant that I had to take some math classes just so I would be able to get through the physics. And when I found that out, I had a major meltdown, and my trajectory, my entire plans for my future was changing just based on that one single belief system that I'm really terrible at math, and I was too stupid to manage to get around this so I would be able to get through the physics classes to even apply to physical therapy school, let alone get through the program itself. So I spent a couple of weeks just agonizing over it and tearing my hair out, and looked into several other advanced degrees thinking, well, I'll just go in a different direction. But alas, all of them were requiring the same physics classes, so I was pretty much stuck. So I developed a little strategy, an action plan, and I decided to go back to the community college and take algebra for dummies first. So I started at the very basic level and figured if I could get through this class, then I would move on to the next one. And if I could get through that one, then I would move on to the next one, and I could hire tutors, I could join a study group, I would do whatever it would take. So lo and behold, I took that very first Algebra for Dummies class, and not only did I ace the class, I was top student in the class. I absolutely loved it, and it was so much fun, and I was actually helping some of my classmates. It was amazing. So then I went on to the next level, the college algebra, same thing. I absolutely loved it. It was fantastic. So I guess as an adult, especially because nobody was telling me that I couldn't do this, it was a whole new world. And because I had given myself the grace to say, okay, I am going to start from the very remedial class that the community college had to offer, and I also gave myself permission to fail, but I also, in the meantime, gave myself a couple of different strategies on how I could succeed. And it was just a play. I didn't realize at the time, but I was playing with my brain, just giving myself some options too. So creating a scenario where I could succeed, and if I didn't, well, that was okay. I would figure something out along the way anyway, but I did give myself a couple of other tools. Another example is the woman that I worked with who did everything, the power yoga, the power walking, the power skiing, the power everything. And she just saw herself as this incredibly strong, powerful, athletic individual. And the fact that she would go home from a 30-minute gentle, basic Pilates rehab session and literally pass out really did a number on her. And she felt that she was weak. She felt that she should be strong enough to be able to just whip right through this. And she had to really change the way she was looking at herself and her belief system that if she wasn't doing something full out to the full extreme and almost killing herself, that was the only way she was going to get the benefit from it. So learning how to slow herself down and really pay attention to her movement not only opened up her world as far as what she could do and what she could accomplish when she did slow down, but it gave her a whole new way of looking at herself in a positive way. I'll give you one last example. A woman that I had worked with years ago asked me to speak to her weight loss group. And of course I accepted. And when I went there, everybody was so charming. They were just so welcoming and warm, and what a wonderful group of people. They were very energetic, and it was just a great energy in the room, and everyone was just so positive and so much fun. And then they started their meeting with a little handbook that they had, and they stood up to recite their meeting. It was really kind of cute. It reminded me of the Girl Scout Creed that we used to do at the beginning of every Girl Scout meeting. And they started to read from their handbook to recite their little mantra or whatever it was. And once they started reading, I was absolutely horrified. I was blown away. I do not remember the specific details, but included in their little pledge were references to their being lazy, disgusting, and slothful. There was also a statement expressing that everyone they met would see their shame and lack of willpower hour because of their weight. I couldn't believe it. I was horrified. And the mantra continued until the very end. And you could even just feel the energy in the room just being sucked right out of it. It was like all the oxygen was sucked out of the room. After the meeting, I very nicely suggested that perhaps they could change the wording of their pledge to include more positive and uplifting messages. But for some reason, my message was not well received, and I was never invited back to speak to the group. But it is really interesting to note that my client never did lose weight in that group, and apparently neither did anyone else, because they folded shortly thereafter, and that was the end of the group. And I really hope that they threw away their little handbooks with that dreadful pledge, denigrating themselves and dissing on themselves in a way that was just really not helpful. But maybe if they had been a little bit more positive, maybe they would have had more success in what they were trying to do. And that's the same thing, not just with weight loss, but with anything in life that we're trying to achieve. Neuroplasticity does not happen overnight. But keep in mind that our nervous system is always listening. It is always paying attention. It is always logging information. It is always recording it, and it is doing it without passion or without judgment. It is just recording that information, and that information is always in there. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is to be kind to yourself, be gentle with yourself, give yourself positive messages, and do not call yourself names. Do not be harsh and judgmental with yourself. And I can say this because I used to be the master of self-denigration. I was so good at it. I could beat myself up better than anybody else could. But, in time when I learned to be a little bit nicer to myself, a little more kind to myself, and less judgmental, life got a whole lot sweeter. There's something, since I am such a nut about neurons, there's something also called mirror neurons, and this is really important to pay attention to as well, because it can have a very sneaky and insidious effect on your mindset, on your wellness, and even on your self-image and on your belief system. I'll give you a few really quick examples of mirror neurons and how they work. Let's pretend that you started your day in a really good mood, and the first person you came across in the morning or when you started your day was obviously very angry or upset or depressed. And as you were watching this person, and maybe they were talking to, or maybe you were just watching their body language, part of your brain is responding in the same way. So that part of your brain that's responsible for anger or depression or sadness is already starting to fire up and to mirror what that other person is feeling. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because you want to be able to be empathetic and to be kind to other people, but you want to make sure that that doesn't really bring you down as well. And consequently, maybe you're starting the day off in a really bad mood or depressed, or things aren't going well for you. And the first person you come across has just got this great big beautiful smile on their face. They are happy. They're on top of the world, and they want to share that with you. And all of a sudden, that part of your brain that registers happiness and upbeat, positive feelings begins to fire up and be activated as well. Once again, helping to at least to some degree to turn around your bad mood and change your day, all for the power of good. So with that in mind, it is very important to be careful and mindful of the company that you keep, because if you're hanging around all the time with somebody who's really negative or a downer or denigrating other people, you have a tendency to take that on yourself. You're actually, when you're in their presence, you're training your brain to do the same thing. And so that's why you really want to be careful of the company you keep and to surround yourself with people who are upbeat and positive. I'm not saying that you should always be around somebody who's Pollyanna, but if you're around somebody all the time who is constantly denigrating people or they're very negative, they're going to drag you down in that pit as well. So choose your friends wisely, and if you notice that you're with somebody who is starting to really make you feel pretty miserable, then it's time to just let them go. There are so many wonderful people in the world that you can spend your time with that can give you a more positive outlook on life. You can support each other in ways that does not tear other people down or tear you down. And as I said before, I was a master of self-denigration and beating myself up. And part of that reason was because of who I was hanging around with so much, my BFF, Mary Pat, which in episode 5, I described that relationship, as well as how and why I broke up with her after being best friends for over 30 years, which is a really interesting story. And there's a whole lot in that. And life did get a whole lot better once I did break up with her. But there was something that did compel me to do it. And that's something that I had mentioned before in previous episodes. And I want to give you a little bit more information about it because it is the master of neuroplasticity. And that is something called Feldenkrais. Feldenkrais. It is a highly sophisticated form of neuromuscular re-education based on the scientific principle of neuroplasticity. And the founder of this method, Moshe Feldenkrais, who was born in 1904, inherently knew that this principle of neuroplasticity did exist in us during the entire course of our lifetime, even though scientific and medical wisdom said otherwise. I discovered the Feldenkrais method for the first time. I think it was around 2002 or 2003. And from the very first class that I ever had in Feldenkrais, I knew from that moment that I just had to become a Feldenkrais practitioner until, of course, I found out that it was a 4-year training program and I would have to go and travel to a different city for the trainings. And I figured that was just not going to work for me. But they did bring a training to Denver in 2006. So I began my 4-year-long training in Feldenkrais in February of 2006. And the next 4 years were just amazing. And I want to share with you more of the principles of Feldenkrais and how Feldenkrais works and uses this principle of neuroplasticity, which can help you not only get what you want out of life, improve the quality of your life, improve the way you move, sense, feel, and think, but also how it can interrupt patterns of pain patterns of behavior or habits that just aren't serving you well. And by habits, I'm talking about even simple habits that you're doing during the day that you don't realize are actually putting destructive forces into your body, into your joints that are causing some of the pain that you are experiencing. But there's a whole lot of information wrapped up in that. And I want to make sure that I can cover it very thoroughly so you can apply some of these principles to your daily life. So I think I'm going to save that for next time. So make sure that you do tune in to episode 16 so you can learn more about this amazing method and how it can help you improve the quality of your life. So once again, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. And thank you for spending your time with me. Until next time, be aware, be safe, keep moving, and keep learning because that is the way of the FemiNinja. And that's a wrap on another episode of the FemiNinja Project. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, be safe, be strong, and until next time, bye now.